The birthday cake sat untouched on the dining table, its cream frosting glistening under the chandelier lights. 32 candles flickered, casting dancing shadows across the faces of my family members. The room fell silent as I watched my stepmother Eleanor lean over and sprinkle something onto my slice. Not sugar or cinnamon, but a fine white powder that dissolved instantly into the vanilla icing. No one else seemed to notice. Or perhaps they simply chose not to see. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Vanessa Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how I finally exposed the poisonous web of lies my stepmother had been weaving around our family for 15 years. The moment that changed everything wasn't dramatic at first, just a birthday dinner at my father's expansive suburban home, a tradition we'd maintained despite the tension that always simmered beneath our celebrations. "Make a wish, Vanessa," my father called from across the table, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He'd been distant lately, more so than usual, consumed by his work and, increasingly, by whatever Eleanor whispered in his ear each night. I hesitated, watching as Eleanor handed me the plate with the doctored slice, her perfectly manicured nails brushing against mine. Her smile was picture perfect, practiced in front of mirrors until it appeared genuine to everyone except me. Our eyes met briefly, and in that fleeting moment I saw it. The cold calculation, the subtle challenge. "Eat it. I dare you. What's wrong, darling?" Eleanor's voice dripped with artificial sweetness. "Don't you want your special birthday slice? I made sure to cut it from the part with the most frosting, just how you like it." My younger half-sister Madeline shifted uncomfortably beside me. At 19, she was starting to notice the undercurrents I'd been swimming against for years. My father remained oblivious, checking his phone under the table, a habit Eleanor had long encouraged. "Important business calls don't stop for birthdays," she'd tell him, while simultaneously criticizing me for any divided attention during family gatherings. "Everything okay, Ness?" This from my best friend Zoe, the only non-family member I'd invited. She knew pieces of my history with Eleanor, though not everything. Not the pills that had mysteriously appeared in my drink during my college graduation party, leading to a hospital visit that Eleanor had dismissed as Vanessa mixing alcohol with her medications again. Not the food poisoning incidents that only ever seemed to affect me. I set the plate down carefully. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'm not very hungry right now." Eleanor's smile tightened. "Nonsense. It's your birthday cake. I spent hours making it from scratch." This was a lie. I'd seen the bakery box in the recycling bin earlier. "I'll have it later," I insisted, watching her eyes narrow slightly. My father finally looked up from his phone. "Vanessa, don't be difficult. Your mother worked hard on that cake." "Stepmother?" I corrected automatically, a distinction I'd maintained religiously for 15 years, ever since my father had brought home the woman who'd been his executive assistant, barely a year after my mother's death. The familiar flash of hurt crossed my father's face, followed immediately by the hardening I'd grown accustomed to seeing. Eleanor placed a restraining hand on his arm, the perfect picture of a peacemaking wife. "It's fine, Richard. Vanessa never appreciates my efforts, but that doesn't mean I'll stop trying." Her voice carried just the right note of martyrdom, a performance that had won over every family friend and relative over the years. Madeline, always the peacekeeper, reached for the cake. "I'll have Vanessa's slice if she doesn't want it." "No!" The word escaped me with more force than I intended, causing everyone at the table to freeze. Eleanor's expression flickered between surprise and something darker before settling back into concerned confusion. "Vanessa, what on earth?" my father began. I took a deep breath. For years, I'd remained silent. I'd ignored the accidents that only happened when Eleanor was around. I'd dismissed my own suspicions as paranoia, allowed doctors to prescribe me anti-anxiety medication when I tried to explain that something wasn't right. I'd watched as Eleanor systematically isolated my father, controlled my access to him, and painted me as emotionally unstable to anyone who would listen. But this time was different. This time, I had proof. I saw what you did, I said, looking directly at Eleanor. Her expression didn't change, but her hand gripped my father's arm more tightly. What are you talking about? You put something in my cake. I saw you. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the house, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, seemed to fade away. 5 faces stared at me, my father's confused, Eleanor's perfectly composed, Madeline's alarmed, Zoe's concerned, and my Uncle Thomas's, my father's brother, uncomfortably shifting in his seat. Eleanor broke the silence with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. Oh, Vanessa, not this again. Richard. I think she might have forgotten to take her medication today. My father's face immediately transitioned from confusion to disappointment. It was a familiar pattern. Eleanor would imply I was being irrational, and my father would believe her without question. That's not what happened, I said, keeping my voice level. You sprinkled something on my slice. It wasn't sugar. It was cinnamon, Eleanor replied smoothly. I know how much you love cinnamon on vanilla cake. Remember at the Christmas party 3 years ago? You mentioned it was your favorite. A perfect response. A reasonable explanation. And completely false. I'd never liked cinnamon, and she knew it. It was a clever trap. If I denied it, I'd sound even more paranoid. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me see the cake, Zoe said suddenly, reaching for my plate. Before Eleanor could react, Zoe had pulled it toward her, examining the slice carefully. Eleanor's composure slipped for just a fraction of a second. There's nothing to see, it's just cinnamon. Zoe looked up, her expression unreadable. This doesn't look like cinnamon to me. Well, what else would it be? Eleanor laughed again, but the sound was strained this time. Honestly, Richard, I don't know why you allow Vanessa to bring these dramatic scenes to every family gathering. My father sighed heavily, the weight of years of mediation evident in his posture. Vanessa, please. Not today. I had heard those words so many times before. Not today. Not at Christmas. Not at Madeline's graduation. There was never a right time to confront the reality of what had been happening in our family. But this time, I was prepared. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen a few times before turning it around to show the table. This is footage from the security camera I installed in the kitchen this morning while everyone was getting ready. The video was clear. Eleanor in the kitchen, removing a small vial from her purse, carefully tapping white powder onto my slice of cake, then returning the vial to her purse before anyone else entered the room. My father's face drained of color as he watched. Madeline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Uncle Thomas leaned forward, squinting at the screen as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Eleanor's reaction was the most telling. Instead of shock or denial, her face went completely blank for several seconds before she recovered. A tremor in her voice as she said, "That's not. That video is obviously edited. Vanessa has always been jealous of me." "What is that, Eleanor?" my father asked, his voice barely audible. "It's nothing, Richard. It's a ridiculous accusation. She's manipulating you, just like she always does." "Then you won't mind if we test the cake," I said, nodding to Zoe, who was already wrapping my slice in a napkin and placing it in her purse. Eleanor stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I won't sit here and be accused like this. Richard, are you really going to let her do this to me? After everything I've done for this family?" My father looked between us, conflict evident in his eyes. This was the moment, the fulcrum upon which 15 years of manipulation balanced. I could see him wavering, see the patterns of doubt Eleanor had cultivated taking root again. "Dad," I said gently, "when have I ever lied to you?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years I felt like he was truly seeing me. Not the troubled daughter Eleanor had invented, but me, the girl who'd lost her mother at 17. And then, slowly, her father too. "I don't know what to believe," he said finally. "Then believe what you see," Zoe said, pointing to my phone where the video was still paused on Eleanor's face, caught in the act. Eleanor's strategy shifted instantly. "Fine. It was just a sleeping pill, crushed up. I thought it might help Vanessa relax." She's been so stressed lately, and I was worried about her. Everything I do is for this family, even when it's not appreciated." The admission hung in the air, stunning in its brazenness. She hadn't denied it anymore. She'd simply reframed it as an act of care. It was classic Eleanor twist reality until her actions seemed not just reasonable, but virtuous. "You were going to drug me. Without my knowledge or consent," I stated flatly. "I was trying to help you." Eleanor's voice rose, her carefully maintained facade cracking. "You're always so difficult, Vanessa, always causing problems. If you just take your medication properly—" "What medication?" my father interrupted, looking confused. "The anti-anxiety pills Dr. Geller prescribed." I took another deep breath. "Dad, I haven't been taking those for over a year now. Dr. Geller wasn't even my doctor. He was Eleanor's friend who agreed to write me prescriptions without a proper psychological evaluation. The therapist I've been seeing for the past year says I don't need them." Eleanor's face contorted. "More lies. Richard, she's making this all up to turn you against me." Madeline spoke up, her voice small but determined. "Mom, I found your purse open in the bathroom last month. There were prescription bottles in there with Vanessa's name on them, but they weren't prescribed to her. They had Dr. Geller's name, but the pharmacy label said they were for you." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Eleanor turned to Madeline, betrayal written across her features. "You went through my purse?" "I was looking for aspirin," Madeline said, shrinking back slightly but holding her ground. "I saw the bottles by accident." Uncle Thomas cleared his throat. "Richard, I think we need to take this seriously." My father stood up slowly, his shoulders slumped as if bearing an invisible weight. "Eleanor, I need you to empty your purse. Right now." "This is ridiculous." Eleanor's voice was shrill now, panic edging in. "You're all ganging up on me because of Vanessa's delusions." But my father's expression had changed. The fog of denial was lifting, and in its place was a dawning horror. "Your purse, Eleanor. Now." For a moment, I thought she might refuse, might storm out and try to salvage her narrative later when emotions had cooled. Instead, something seemed to break inside her. Her shoulders slumped, and she reached for her designer handbag with trembling hands. The contents of Eleanor's purse spilled across the dining table, cascading over the birthday decorations she'd so carefully arranged earlier. Amidst the normal items, wallet, keys, lipstick, phone, were 3 prescription bottles. My father picked one up, reading the label with increasing disbelief. "These are prescribed to Vanessa, but they're in your purse," he said slowly, as if trying to make sense of it. "And this is a powerful sedative. Why do you have these?" Eleanor's composure crumbled entirely. "She needs them. She's unstable, Richard. You know that. I've been trying to help her for years, but she fights me at every turn. Someone has to take care of this family." "By drugging my daughter?" My father's voice had a dangerous edge I'd never heard before. "It was just occasionally, when she was being particularly difficult," Eleanor said, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "For her own good." The casual admission stunned the room into silence again. It was one thing to suspect what had been happening, another entirely to hear it confirmed so blatantly. "How long?" My father's question was directed at Eleanor, but his eyes were on me, filled with a dawning horror. "Since college," I said quietly, "the night I ended up in the hospital after my graduation party. It wasn't because I mixed alcohol with medication. It was because she put something in my champagne." Eleanor's laugh was hollow. "You can't prove that. No one would believe you then, and no one will believe you now." "Actually," Zoe interjected, "that's not true. I'm a pharmaceutical researcher, Eleanor. I kept a sample of what was in Vanessa's system that night. I've had my suspicions for years, but I couldn't prove anything until today." This was news even to me. I turned to Zoe in surprise. She gave me a small, sad smile. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't have enough evidence, and I was afraid you wouldn't believe me either. Eleanor has been very convincing." My father turned to Eleanor, 15 years of trust dissolving before our eyes. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why would you do this?" Eleanor's face transformed. the mask of the caring stepmother falling away completely. "Because she was in the way," she snapped. "Always taking your attention, making demands, reminding you of her mother. I did everything for you, Richard. I organized your life. I made this house a home. I gave you another daughter. And still, Vanessa was always there, always the priority." The raw jealousy in her voice was startling. For years she'd hidden it beneath layers of concern and care, but now it was fully exposed, ugly, and undeniable. "I wanted you to see her for what she is. Unstable, unreliable. I needed you to trust me more than her. Is that so wrong? After everything I've sacrificed?" My father's face hardened with each word. "You've been poisoning my daughter. For years. Well, I trusted you to care for her." "I did care for her," Eleanor insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "In my own way. Everything I did was for us, for our family." "This isn't family," my father said quietly. "This is abuse." The word hung in the air, impossible to retract or reinterpret. Abuse. For 15 years, I doubted myself, questioned my own perceptions, allowed myself to believe that perhaps I was the problem. Hearing my father finally name what had been happening was like a dam breaking inside me. Tears I'd held back for years threatened to spill over. "Richard, please," Eleanor began, reaching for him, but he stepped back. "Don't touch me," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "I want you out of this house. Tonight." Eleanor's face contorted with fury. "You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my concern anymore." My father turned to Uncle Thomas. "Call the police." "The police?" Eleanor's voice rose to a shriek. "For what? For trying to help your psychologically disturbed daughter?" "For poisoning my daughter on multiple occasions," my father corrected, his voice ice cold. "For obtaining prescription medication fraudulently. For assault." Eleanor turned to me, her eyes blazing with hatred no longer disguised by false concern. "This is your fault. It's always been your fault. If you had just gone away to college and stayed away, everything would have been perfect." I met her gaze steadily. "I know. That's why I never left. Because I knew what you were, even when no one else could see it. It was the truth. Through all the gaslighting, all the manipulation, all the carefully orchestrated incidents, some part of me had always known. I'd stayed close not just because I loved my father and worried about my half-sister, but because I knew that someone needed to witness what was happening, even if I couldn't yet prove it." As Uncle Thomas stepped into the hallway to make the call, Eleanor made one last desperate attempt. "Madeline, sweetheart, you know I've always taken care of you. Tell your father this is a mistake." Madeline looked between Eleanor and me, years of confusion finally clearing. "Is that why I never got sick, but Vanessa did? Is that why you always told me not to eat what you served her? You said it was because she had special dietary needs, but that wasn't true, was it?" Eleanor's silence was answer enough. "You used me," Madeline continued, her voice gaining strength. "You made me complicit without me even knowing." The betrayal in Madeline's eyes seemed to affect Eleanor more than anything else. For the first time, she had no ready response, no counter-narrative to offer. The sound of sirens in the distance broke the tension. Eleanor glanced toward the front door, then back at my father, calculation replacing the fury in her eyes. "Richard?" she said, her voice suddenly soft, reasonable. "We can work this out. 15 years of marriage, thrown away over a misunderstanding. What would people say?" It was her final card, my father's concern for appearances, for his reputation in the community. For a terrible moment, I thought it might work. I'd seen him bend to this pressure before, prioritizing the appearance of a perfect family over the messy reality. But something had fundamentally shifted. He looked at me, really looked at me, and then at Madeline, whose eyes were brimming with tears of confusion and betrayal. "They would say I finally protected my daughters," he answered simply. "And they would be right." As the police officers entered our dining room, the birthday candles still flickering on the contaminated cake, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 15 years. Safety. The long campaign of doubt and fear that Eleanor had waged was over. The truth, so long buried under layers of manipulation, was finally exposed to the light. Eleanor was led away in handcuffs, still protesting her innocence, still trying to spin a narrative where she was the victim. But her words fell flat now, the spell broken. In the aftermath, as statements were given and evidence collected, my father approached me, hesitation in every step. "Vanessa," he began, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to." I stopped him with a raised hand. "Not now, Dad. We have time for that conversation later." And we would. There would be difficult conversations ahead, years of trust to rebuild, therapy sessions, and legal proceedings. But for now, it was enough that the poisoning, both literal and figurative, had stopped. As the police finished their work and prepared to leave, one officer approached me. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to provide a full statement. This case may go back further than today's incident." I nodded, suddenly exhausted. "I'll be there. I have documentation going back years. I just never thought anyone would believe me." The officer's expression softened slightly. "Family cases are always the hardest. People don't want to see what's happening right in front of them." How true that was. For 15 years, a slow poisoning had been occurring in plain sight. Not just the medications Eleanor had been slipping into my food and drinks, but the toxic doubt she'd introduced into every relationship in our family. The way she'd convinced everyone, including medical professionals, that I was the unstable one. The way she'd isolated my father from anyone who might question her narrative. As the officers left with Eleanor, as Uncle Thomas helped my father make arrangements for the night, as Madeline sat shell-shocked on the couch trying to process the revelation that her mother had been systematically poisoning her half-sister, Zoe approached me quietly. "You did it," she said simply. "After all these years, you finally caught her." I looked around the wreckage of my 32nd birthday party. The half-eaten cake, the scattered contents of Eleanor's purse, the video evidence still frozen on my phone screen. "I just wish it hadn't taken so long." Zoe squeezed my shoulder. "You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, justice works that way too sometimes. It's been a long time coming, but it's here now." And she was right. As I blew out the remaining birthday candles, a private ritual, a moment of closure, I made a new wish. Not for vengeance, which had never been my goal, but for healing. For my father, for Madeline, for myself. For the long road ahead of us as we rebuilt what Eleanor had so methodically destroyed. The cake remained uneaten, a symbol of the poison that had finally been purged from our lives. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt like I could truly breathe. In the days following my birthday disaster, the truth unfolded like a dark flower blooming in sunlight. The police investigation revealed horrors beyond what even I had suspected. Eleanor's phone contained detailed notes tracking the medications she'd given me over the years. Dosages, effects, times when I'd nearly caught her. She'd been methodical in her poisoning, calculating just enough to make me appear unstable without causing permanent damage. We found evidence going back 13 years. Detective Morales told me as I sat in her office reviewing the case file. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the photographs spread between us. Pill bottles with my name, Eleanor's handwritten journals, medical records she'd altered. The pharmacy records alone are enough for multiple felony charges. I stared at the evidence of a crime that had spanned most of my adult life. "She started 3 months after marrying my father," I said quietly. "I remember getting violently ill after a family dinner. Everyone thought it was food poisoning." Detective Morales nodded grimly. "According to her notes, that was the first test, to see how your father would react. When he believed her explanation over your experience, she escalated." The revelation sat heavy in my chest. My instincts had been right all along. But knowing that didn't erase the years of doubt and isolation I'd endured. As I left the police station, rain fell in gentle sheets, matching the quiet tears that slid down my cheeks, not of sadness, but of validation. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't questioning my own reality. My father waited in his car at the curb, hunched over the steering wheel. At 58, he'd always been robust, commanding, the successful business owner who could solve any problem. Now he looked diminished, aged by guilt and betrayal. They're charging her with aggravated assault, obtaining prescription medication by fraud, and attempted poisoning, I said as I slid into the passenger seat. Her bail hearing is tomorrow. He nodded wordlessly, hands gripping the wheel though the car remained parked. The silence between us was thick with unspoken accusations and apologies. "Dad," I began, "we need to." "I failed you," he interrupted, voice cracking. "For 15 years I failed you in the worst possible way. I brought that woman into our home, into our lives, and when you tried to tell me something was wrong, I dismissed you." The raw pain in his voice melted some of the ice that had formed around my heart. "You believed her because you wanted to believe her," I said softly. "She gave you an explanation that was easier to accept than the truth." He turned to me, eyes red-rimmed. "That's no excuse, Vanessa. I'm your father. I was supposed to protect you, and instead—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "Instead, I had to protect myself." I completed his thought. And I did. I'm still here. The rain drummed steadily on the roof of the car, creating a cocoon around our conversation. For the first time since my mother died, my father and I were truly seeing each other, without Eleanor's manipulations coloring our perceptions. "How do we move forward from this?" he asked, sounding lost. I considered his question carefully. The easy answer would be forgiveness, the kind of instant absolution that families and movies grant each other after revelations like these. But real healing couldn't be so simple. "One day at a time," I said finally, "with honesty, with therapy, separate and together, and with the understanding that trust has to be rebuilt. It won't happen overnight." He nodded, accepting this difficult truth. "I'd like to start now, with honesty," he said, turning to face me fully. "I was blind because I wanted to be. After your mother died, I was so broken, and Eleanor seemed to fix everything. She organized our lives. She made decisions when I couldn't. She gave me a reason to keep going. I mistook convenience for love." This admission, painful as it was to hear, was the beginning of our long road back to each other. As we drove home through the rain-slicked streets, I realized that Eleanor's arrest wasn't an ending but a beginning, the first chapter in our family's recovery story. Madeline was waiting at the house, her university textbooks spread across the kitchen table in a desperate attempt at normalcy. At 19, she was caught in an impossible position, loving a mother who had committed unforgivable acts, trying to reconcile the woman who had raised her with the criminal revealed at my birthday dinner. "How did it go?" she asked, eyes flicking nervously between my father and me. "They have enough evidence for multiple charges," I said, keeping my voice gentle. Despite everything, Madeline was another victim in Eleanor's web of manipulation, and I was determined not to let Eleanor's actions divide us further. "I still can't believe it," Madeline whispered. "All those times she told me you were having episodes, she was causing them. All those times she said you needed special meals because of your condition. She was poisoning you." Her voice broke on the last word. I crossed the kitchen and wrapped my arms around my half-sister. Despite sharing only a father, in that moment, the bond between us felt stronger than blood, forged in the fire of shared betrayal. "It's not your fault," I murmured into her hair. "She used you as much as she used anyone." "But I should have seen it," Madeline insisted, pulling back to look at me. "There were so many signs. The way she'd insist on serving your plate herself. The way she'd get so angry if you refused to eat or drink something she'd prepared. The way she'd always have an explanation ready whenever you got sick." My father joined us, placing a hand on each of our shoulders. "We all should have seen it," he said. "But Eleanor was expert at making the abnormal seem normal. That's what abusers do. They create a reality where their behavior makes sense, and then they make you doubt yourself when you question it." His words, clearly drawn from research he'd been doing since Eleanor's arrest, surprised me. The father I knew would have avoided such painful introspection, preferring to move forward without looking back. This willingness to understand the dynamics of what had happened marked a significant change. That night, the three of us sat around the kitchen table until dawn, piecing together 15 years of manipulations, identifying patterns we'd missed, and beginning the painful process of rewriting our family narrative. The story we'd been living, of a troubled daughter, a concerned stepmother, and a father caught in between, had been Eleanor's creation. Now we had to author our own truth. She isolated us. My father realized aloud as our conversation stretched into the early morning hours. Not just from each other, but from everyone. Remember how she convinced me to move the company headquarters away from the city? How she suggested Madeline attend the local university instead of going away to school? How she discouraged my friendships with anyone who seemed too interested in our family dynamics? Madeline nodded slowly, and she was always the go-between. If I wanted to talk to you, Dad, she'd offer to pass along the message. If Vanessa tried to make plans with you, Eleanor would say you were too busy, but she'd try to arrange something. Classic isolation tactics, I said, thinking of the research I'd done over the years, trying to understand what was happening in our family. She made herself the gatekeeper of all our relationships. As dawn broke, casting soft golden light across the kitchen, we had filled a notebook with revelations, a decade and a half of manipulation exposed in the span of a single night. It was exhausting, heartbreaking work, but necessary. We couldn't heal what we couldn't name. What happens now? Madeline asked as we finally prepared to get some rest. With the legal case, I mean. My father sighed heavily. Eleanor's attorney called yesterday. They're pushing for a plea deal. Reduced charges in exchange for no trial. And you told them? I prompted, sensing his hesitation. I told them we'd discuss it as a family, he said, meeting my eyes steadily. This decision affects all of us, especially you, Vanessa. If there's a trial, everything comes out publicly. If she takes a plea, it's more private, but the punishment might be less severe. I considered this carefully. The thought of testifying, of having my medical history scrutinized, of facing Eleanor across a courtroom, was daunting. But so was the thought of her receiving a lighter sentence because we wanted to avoid discomfort. I need time to think about it, I said finally, and I want to talk to the prosecutor before we decide anything. My father nodded, accepting this boundary, another small step in our new relationship. As we all headed to our rooms, Madeline paused at the top of the stairs. Vanessa, do you think she ever loved any of us? Really? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. I thought about Eleanor's meticulous notes, the calculated way she'd undermined me while presenting herself as the perfect wife and mother. I thought about the jealousy that had driven her to such extreme measures. I think she loved the idea of us, I said carefully. The perfect family she could show to the world. The successful husband, the adoring stepdaughter, the bright biological daughter. But real love doesn't try to control or harm. Real love wants the best for others, even when it's inconvenient. Madeline absorbed this, then nodded slowly. I think I need to see her. Before I can decide how I feel, I need to look her in the eye and ask her why. My father and I exchanged concerned glances. Are you sure that's wise? He asked gently. No, Madeline admitted. But it's necessary, for me. I respected her courage. Then we'll support you, I said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. Whatever you decide. In the days that followed, our family began the slow process of reconstruction. We met with therapists, individually, and as a family. We spoke with lawyers about the case against Eleanor. We sorted through her belongings, finding more evidence of her deception, hidden bank accounts, correspondence with Dr. Geller dating back years, even a small lockbox containing various medications and handwritten notes about their effects. 2 weeks after my birthday dinner, Madeline visited Eleanor in the county jail. My father and I waited in the car, both of us silently terrified that Eleanor would manipulate Madeline once again, that her influence would reach beyond the prison walls. When Madeline returned, her face was tear-streaked but resolute. She hasn't changed, she said as she slid into the back seat. She spent the entire visit explaining how this is all a misunderstanding, how she was only trying to help our family. She never once asked how I was feeling or acknowledged what she did to Vanessa. My father reached back to take her hand. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." Madeline squeezed his fingers, then met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "I'm not. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know that she isn't going to suddenly become the mother I thought I had." Her clarity was both heartbreaking and inspiring. At 19, Madeline was facing a truth that many adults spend lifetimes avoiding, that sometimes the people who should love us the most are incapable of healthy love. That evening, as we sat around the dining table that had been the site of Eleanor's final exposure, I made my decision about the plea deal. "I want to go to trial," I said firmly. "I know it will be hard, and public, and messy, but I need the truth to be officially recognized. I need a jury to hear what she did and say it was wrong." My father nodded, no hint of resistance in his expression. "Then that's what we'll do. I'll call the prosecutor tomorrow." Madeline reached across the table to take my hand. "I'll testify if they need me to. About the medications I found. About the things she said about you. All of it." Their support brought fresh tears to my eyes. For so long I'd stood alone against Eleanor's manipulations. Having my family finally on my side felt like a miracle I'd stopped believing was possible. The trial was set for 3 months later. In the interim, our family began the process of rebuilding, not just our relationships with each other, but our individual senses of reality. Years of gaslighting had left all of us questioning our perceptions, second-guessing our memories, hesitant to trust our instincts. My father threw himself into understanding psychological abuse, reading books, and attending support groups for families affected by similar situations. Madeline started therapy twice weekly, working through her complicated feelings about the mother who had raised her with seeming devotion while systematically poisoning her sister. I focused on physical healing, working with doctors to assess any long-term damage from years of intermittent poisoning. "You're lucky," Dr. Patel told me during a comprehensive evaluation. "The types of medications she used typically don't cause permanent organ damage unless taken continuously. The intermittent nature of the poisoning likely prevented worse outcomes." Lucky wasn't a word I would have chosen, but I understood his medical perspective. Physically, I would recover completely. Emotionally, the journey would be longer. As the trial date approached, Eleanor's attorney made increasingly desperate offers. 2 years instead of 10. 18 months with time served. A suspended sentence with mandatory psychiatric treatment. "She's scared," the prosecutor, Ms. Hernandez, explained during one of our meetings. "The evidence is overwhelming and she knows it. A jury will have no sympathy once they see those journals, those pharmacy records." I considered each offer carefully, discussed them with my father and Madeline, consulted my therapist. In the end, my answer remained the same. No deal. She needs to face what she did in open court. Ms. Hernandez nodded approvingly. It's the right decision, though not the easiest. Her actions were calculated, sustained, and deeply harmful. She needs to be held fully accountable. The week before the trial, an unexpected letter arrived at our house. The return address was the county jail, but the handwriting wasn't Eleanor's. It belonged to her cellmate, a woman named Denise Miller. "You don't know me," the letter began, "but I've been sharing a cell with Vanessa Mitchell for the past 2 months. She talks in her sleep. She plans constantly. And I need to warn you, she's not done trying to hurt your family." The letter detailed conversations Eleanor had had with other inmates, plans she'd discussed about using her network of friends to continue monitoring us, even from jail. She'd apparently boasted about having, quote, contingency plans if the legal system failed her. "I'm writing because I have a daughter too," Denise's letter concluded. "And if someone was planning to harm her the way Eleanor talks about harming you, I'd want to know." We immediately forwarded the letter to Ms. Hernandez and Detective Morales. Security measures were implemented. Our home address was flagged in the police system for priority response, and we were advised to vary our routines, to be vigilant about who had access to our personal information. This is Eleanor's final attempt at control. My therapist, Dr. Chen, explained during an emergency session. She's trying to make you feel unsafe, to remind you that her influence extends beyond her physical presence. Understanding the psychological tactic didn't completely eliminate its effect. In the days before the trial, I found myself checking locks repeatedly, startling at unexpected sounds, scanning crowds for familiar faces, who might be reporting back to Eleanor. But there was a crucial difference now. I wasn't facing these fears alone. My father installed a security system in our home. Madeline and I developed a buddy system, checking in with each other throughout the day. Zoe recruited friends to accompany me to and from work. The morning of the trial dawned clear and cool. As I dressed in the conservative blue suit I'd selected with Dr. Chen's guidance, you want to project confidence and stability, not victimhood, I found myself unexpectedly calm. Whatever happened in that courtroom, the truth was already out. Eleanor no longer controlled our family narrative. The courthouse steps were crowded with local media. Our case had attracted attention due to both the unusual nature of the charges and my father's prominence in the business community. We walked past the cameras with heads held high, a united front. Inside the courtroom, I saw Eleanor for the first time since my birthday dinner. She sat beside her attorney, dressed in a modest gray dress that had been carefully selected to make her appear harmless, maternal. When she saw us enter, her expression shifted momentarily, revealing the cold calculation beneath the facade. The trial opened with the prosecutor's statement. Clear, concise, devastating in its simplicity. This case is about trust betrayed in the most fundamental way, Ms. Hernandez told the jury. It's about a woman who systematically poisoned her stepdaughter for 15 years, all while presenting herself as a caring mother figure. It's about calculated harm disguised as concern. Eleanor's attorney countered with the narrative she'd been crafting since her arrest, that she was a concerned stepmother dealing with a troubled young woman, that any medications had been given with good intentions, that this was a family matter that had been grossly mischaracterized. But as the evidence mounted, the video from my birthday, the journal entries, the pharmacy records, the testimony from medical experts, that narrative crumbled. Even Eleanor's carefully cultivated courtroom demeanor began to slip, her responses becoming defensive, then openly hostile under cross-examination. You testified that you only gave Ms. Lewis medications, occasionally, for her own good, Ms. Hernandez said during a particularly tense exchange. But your own journals document at least 147 separate instances of administering prescription drugs without her knowledge over a 15-year period. How do you explain this discrepancy? Eleanor's facade cracked completely. She was always in the way, she snapped, glaring at me across the courtroom. Always the center of attention, always playing the victim. I was trying to show everyone what she was really like. The courtroom fell silent at this unintended confession. Eleanor's attorney attempted damage control, but it was too late. The jury had seen behind the mask to the jealousy and resentment that had driven 15 years of calculated harm. After 7 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, delivered a sentence that acknowledged the severity and duration of Eleanor's crimes. 12 years in prison, no possibility of parole for at least 8, and a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with me, my father, or Madeline. As Eleanor was led away, she turned to look at us one last time. There was no remorse in her expression, only a cold fury at having finally been exposed. In that moment, I understood that she would never acknowledge the harm she had caused, never accept responsibility for her actions. Her narrative, in which she was always the hero, never the villain, was too fundamental to her identity. Outside the courthouse, standing in the same spot where we'd entered a week earlier, my father, Madeline, and I faced the media together. We had decided in advance that I would be the one to speak. Today, justice was served not just for me, but for every person who has ever been gaslit, manipulated, or made to doubt their own reality, I said, my voice steady, despite the cameras and microphones thrust toward me. Eleanor Mitchell's actions were not those of a concerned stepmother, but of an abuser who used her position of trust to cause harm. The guilty verdict today sends a message that such behavior will not be tolerated, especially when it happens within families. A reporter called out, "What would you say to others who might be experiencing similar abuse but are afraid to come forward?" I considered the question carefully, knowing my words might reach someone in desperate need of validation. I would tell them that they're not crazy, their perceptions are real. Their discomfort is valid. And most importantly, they deserve to be safe in their own homes with their own families. Help is available, and the truth, however painful, is always better than living in an abuser's carefully constructed lie. As we left the courthouse, stepping into a future without Eleanor's toxic influence, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Not just the burden of the trial, but the heavier weight of 15 years of doubt and fear. There would be more healing to do, more therapy sessions, more difficult conversations. But the poisoning had stopped, both literally and figuratively. That evening, as my father, Madeline, and I shared a quiet dinner at home, Madeline raised her glass in a toast. "To truth," she said simply. "To trust," my father added, his eyes meeting mine with new understanding. I lifted my own glass, feeling the significance of this moment, not an ending, but a beginning. "To healing," I said. "And to the family we're becoming, not the one we were told we had to be." Our glasses clinked together, the sound bright and clear in the peaceful kitchen, the same room where, 3 months earlier, Eleanor had prepared a poisoned birthday cake. Now it was simply our kitchen again, reclaimed like so much else in our lives. The road ahead would not be easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. Patterns, once established, don't disappear without conscious effort to create new ones. But as I looked at my father and sister across the table, I knew with certainty that we had taken the most important step. We had chosen truth over comfortable lies, healing over familiar pain, and each other over the toxic bonds that had held us captive for too long. "I'm proud of us," I said softly. My father reached across the table to take my hand, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "We're going to be okay," he said. It wasn't a question this time, but a promise. And I believed him. 1 year after Eleanor's sentencing, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blazer, preparing for a speaking engagement that would have been unimaginable 12 months ago. The woman reflected back at me looked different from the one who had discovered poison in her birthday cake. Steadier, more confident, unburdened by the constant vigilance that had characterized 15 years of my life. "You sure you're ready for this?" My father appeared in the doorway, his own transformation evident in the way he carried himself. No longer hunched with the weight of denial and guilt, but standing tall, present in a way he hadn't been since before my mother died. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing down my hair. The foundation says there are over 300 people registered for the event. The Vanessa Mitchell case, as it had become known in the media, had sparked a national conversation about familial abuse, gaslighting, and the insidious nature of poisoning, both literal and psychological. What had begun as a personal nightmare had evolved into an opportunity to help others recognize the warning signs we had missed for so long. The Daybreak Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting survivors of psychological abuse, had invited me to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference. My address, titled "Trusting Your Truth, Surviving Systematic Gaslighting," would be live-streamed to thousands more across the country. "Madeline called," my father said, checking his watch. "Her flight landed early. She's grabbing an Uber and should meet us at the venue." Since Eleanor's conviction, Madeline had transferred to an out-of-state university, a decision we had all supported as part of her healing journey. Distance from the physical spaces where Eleanor's manipulation had occurred gave her room to process her complicated feelings about the mother she had lost, not to death, but to the revelation of who she truly was. "How did her therapy session go yesterday?" I asked, gathering my notes and sliding them into my bag. "Good, from what she said. She's working through the guilt about not seeing what was happening to you." I told her we all carry that burden. I nodded, understanding all too well. Despite countless therapy sessions reassuring us that Eleanor's manipulation had been expert, that her ability to maintain her facade for 15 years spoke to her exceptional skill at deception, rather than our failure to see through it. The guilt lingered. Not as sharp as before, but present nonetheless. The drive to the conference center was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The past year had been one of intense healing and readjustment. The three of us had sold the house where Eleanor's crimes had occurred, unable to separate the space from the trauma it had witnessed. We'd established new traditions, new patterns of communication, new ways of being a family defined by honesty rather than appearance. My father had stepped back from his company, delegating day-to-day operations to focus on what he called the work that matters, rebuilding his relationship with his daughters, supporting abuse survivor organizations, and his own intensive therapy. Madeline had switched her major from business, Eleanor's choice, to psychology, driven by a desire to understand and perhaps someday help others who had experienced similar family trauma. And I had found my voice, first in therapy, then in support groups, and now on platforms that reached thousands. The silent, doubting woman who had spent years questioning her own perceptions had been replaced by someone who understood the power and necessity of speaking uncomfortable truths. As we pulled into the conference center parking lot, I spotted Madeline waiting by the entrance, her face lighting up when she saw us. At 20, she carried herself with a new maturity, the experience of the past year having accelerated her growth in ways none of us would have chosen but all of us respected. "There's my favorite keynote speaker," she said, embracing me tightly. "Ready to change some lives today?" Her faith in me was still sometimes startling. Before Eleanor's exposure, our relationship had been cordial but distant, shaped by her mother's careful manipulation. Now, without that toxic influence, we had discovered a natural sisterhood that felt like one of the few gifts to emerge from the wreckage of our family's deception. "I'm just hoping not to trip on my way to the podium," I joked, linking arms with her as we entered the building. "You'll be magnificent," my father assured me, his hand warm on my shoulder. "You always are." Inside, the conference was bustling with attendees, survivors, advocates, mental health professionals, and law enforcement representatives. Our family's case had highlighted gaps in how the medical system, law enforcement, and social services identified and responded to this particular form of abuse, leading to new training protocols and increased awareness. As I was ushered to the preparation area by the event coordinator, I caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Drive. Geller, Eleanor's co-conspirator, who had provided the prescriptions she used to poison me over the years. Following Eleanor's conviction, his medical license had been revoked, and he faced his own legal consequences for his role in her crimes. Our eyes met briefly across the room. He looked away first, shame evident in the slump of his shoulders, as he was escorted from the building by security. His presence was a stark reminder that Eleanor's ability to harm me had depended on a network of enablers, some active participants, others merely willing to look the other way. "Ms. Lewis?" The event coordinator touched my arm. "We're ready for you whenever you are." I took a deep breath, centering myself as I'd learned to do in therapy. The audience before me represented hundreds of stories similar to mine. People who had been made to doubt their own realities, who had been harmed by those who claimed to love them, who were working to reclaim their sense of self after systematic erasure. As I stepped onto the stage, the applause was warm and welcoming. I placed my notes on the podium, though I hardly needed them. This story lived in my bones, had shaped every aspect of my life for 15 years, and would continue to influence who I became in the decades ahead. "Thank you for being here today," I began, my voice steady and clear. "My name is Vanessa Lewis. A year ago, I discovered that my stepmother had been poisoning me since I was 17 years old. For 15 years, she added prescription medications to my food and drinks, documented the effects in detailed journals, and convinced my family, friends, and medical professionals that I was unstable and unreliable." The room was utterly silent, every person present understanding the courage it took to speak these words aloud. "This is not a story about victimhood," I continued. "It's a story about recognition, resistance, and reclamation. It's about trusting yourself when everyone around you says you shouldn't. It's about the long, slow process of poisoning, not just of the body, but of relationships, of trust, of one's very sense of reality. And most importantly, it's about the even longer process of healing. For the next 45 minutes, I shared our family's journey, the red flags we'd missed, the moments of clarity that had been dismissed, the physical and psychological toll of long-term gaslighting, and the steps we'd taken toward recovery. I spoke about the importance of documentation, of finding even one person who believes you, of trusting your own experience, even when it contradicts the narrative you're being sold. The most dangerous aspect of psychological abuse, I explained, is how it makes you complicit in your own harm. When someone convinces you that you can't trust your own perceptions, you become the perfect victim, constantly doubting, constantly apologizing, constantly trying to fix what was never broken in the first place. From the podium, I could see my father and Madeline in the front row, their eyes never leaving me. Their presence was a testament to how far we'd come, from a family fractured by deception to one united by truth, however painful that truth had been to face. Recovery isn't linear, I continued. There are days when I still check my food, when I still question my memories, when I still hear Eleanor's voice in my head telling me I'm overreacting, being dramatic, making things up. But those days grow fewer. The voice grows fainter. And my own voice, my true voice, grows stronger. As I concluded my speech, I shared the most important lesson I'd learned through our family's ordeal. Healing happens in community. It happens when we speak our truths and have them recognized. It happens when we build connections based on authenticity rather than appearance. It happens when we choose reality over comforting lies. The standing ovation that followed was overwhelming, not just for me, but for every person in that room who had ever doubted their own experience, who had ever been told they were imagining things that were all too real. After the speech, I participated in a panel discussion with mental health professionals and law enforcement representatives, sharing insights about how systems could better identify and respond to cases like mine. The collaborative approach, survivors working alongside professionals to improve identification and intervention, felt like the beginning of meaningful change. During the break that followed, I was approached by a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22, her hands trembling slightly as she introduced herself. "Ms. Lewis, I'm Shannon," she said quietly. "I just wanted to thank you. I've been telling my parents for years that something's wrong with the food at my grandmother's house, that I get sick every time I visit, but no one else does. After reading about your case, they finally believed me enough to have some samples tested." She paused, swallowing hard. "They found rodenticide, low doses, but consistent." The revelation hit me like a physical force. Here was tangible proof that our family's painful exposure had served a greater purpose, that by sharing our story, we had potentially saved this young woman from years of continued poisoning. "What happens now?" I asked her gently. "My grandmother is being evaluated psychiatrically before charges are filed," Shannon explained. "My parents are devastated, but—" She straightened her shoulders slightly. "But I feel validated for the first time in years. I'm not crazy. I wasn't imagining it." I recognized the profound relief in her voice. The same relief I had felt when the toxicology reports confirmed what I had long suspected. "No, you weren't imagining it," I affirmed. "And I'm so glad you were heard before more harm was done." As Shannon moved away, promising to stay in touch, Madeline appeared at my side. "You okay?" she asked, noting my slightly shaken expression. I shared Shannon's story with her, watching as the implications registered on her face. "This is why we're doing this," Madeline said firmly. "This is why it matters." She was right. In the months following Eleanor's conviction, I had grappled with the public nature of our family trauma, the media coverage, the true crime podcasts, the occasional uncomfortable recognition in grocery stores. But Shannon's story reminded me why exposure, however difficult, was crucial. Our private pain, when shared, became a beacon for others still trapped in similar situations. That evening, the foundation hosted a smaller reception for speakers, organizers, and major donors. As I circulated through the room, I was approached by a distinguished woman in her 60s, whom I recognized as Judge Harriet Chen, who had presided over Eleanor's trial. "Ms. Lewis," she greeted me warmly, "your speech today was remarkable. You've turned a terrible experience into a powerful tool for education and awareness." "Thank you, Your Honor," I replied, genuinely touched by her presence. "Your ruling in our case set an important precedent. She nodded thoughtfully. I've seen many family cases in my years on the bench, but few with such clear evidence of long-term, calculated harm. Your stepmother's journals were particularly damning and illuminating. They've actually been incorporated into training materials for new judges handling similar cases. The knowledge that Eleanor's meticulous documentation of her crimes was now being used to identify and prosecute others like her felt like a fitting form of justice. Her weapons turned against the very system of abuse she had perpetuated. As the reception wound down, my father, Madeline, and I found ourselves alone in a quiet corner of the room, 3 survivors bound by shared trauma and shared healing. "I'm proud of us," my father said simply, echoing words I had spoken a year earlier, in the aftermath of Eleanor's conviction. "Look how far we've come." Indeed, the transformation was remarkable. A year ago, we had been shattered by revelation and betrayal, our family unit broken in ways that had seemed irreparable. Now, though still healing, we had forged something new from the ruins, a relationship based on authenticity, mutual support, and unwavering commitment to truth. "I've been thinking," Madeline said, twisting her water glass thoughtfully, "about starting a support group at school for students from dysfunctional families. There are so many who don't have the words for what they're experiencing, who don't have any framework for understanding that their normal isn't actually normal." Her initiative didn't surprise me. Throughout our recovery, Madeline had shown a remarkable capacity for transforming her pain into purpose, her confusion into clarity. Where she had once been the perfect, compliant daughter Eleanor had molded, she was now a fierce advocate for her own autonomy and the well-being of others. "That's a wonderful idea," I encouraged her. "The support groups I attended after Eleanor's arrest were instrumental in my healing. Having people who understand, who don't need the background explained, it's invaluable." My father nodded agreement, then hesitated before adding, "I've been approached about writing a book. About our experience from my perspective. About the warning signs I missed, the red flags I dismissed. About how to recognize when someone you love is being victimized, even when, especially when, the perpetrator is someone you trust." This was news to both of us. My father had been the most private about his healing journey, his shame and guilt making it difficult for him to speak openly about his role in Eleanor's long campaign of harm. "Dad, that's huge," Madeline said, squeezing his hand. "Are you considering it?" He met my eyes, seeking permission. "Only if you're comfortable with it, Vanessa. It's primarily your story to tell." I considered his question carefully. A year ago, the thought of having our family's trauma further exposed would have been unbearable. But now, I understood that silence served only those who inflicted harm, while openness, painful as it might be, served those who had been harmed. "I think it's important," I said finally. "Your perspective is unique. There are countless partners who are in the position you are in, unable or unwilling to see what's happening under their own roof. Your voice could reach them in ways mine can't." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you. I promise to be thoughtful, to respect your privacy where possible, to focus on my own failures and learnings rather than sensationalizing what happened." As we prepared to leave the reception, a foundation representative approached with an unexpected request. "Ms. Lewis, we've had overwhelming feedback about your keynote. We'd like to establish an annual scholarship in your name for survivors of family abuse pursuing education in psychology, social work, or related fields. Would you be willing to lend your name to such an initiative?" The offer was both humbling and affirming. "I'd be honored," I replied, "but I'd like it to be the Lewis Family Scholarship, not just my name. My father and sister are equal parts of this journey." The representative agreed readily, and as we signed the preliminary paperwork, I felt a sense of closure, unlike any I'd experienced in the past year. Eleanor had tried to define our family according to her distorted vision. Now, we were defining ourselves, not as victims of her abuse, but as advocates, educators, and champions for those still struggling to recognize and escape similar situations. Later that night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I found myself reflecting on the long journey from that birthday dinner a year ago to this moment. The path had been neither straight nor easy. There had been setbacks, panic attacks triggered by unexpected reminders, moments of doubt when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, days when the weight of what we had experienced felt too heavy to bear. But there had also been profound moments of grace. My father learning to listen instead of dismiss, Madeline finding her voice independent of her mother's influence, me reclaiming my health and autonomy one day at a time. And perhaps most importantly, our collective decision to use our painful experience to illuminate the shadows where abuse thrived, to create meaning from suffering that might otherwise have remained senseless. A notification on my phone interrupted my reflections. A message from Zoe with a link to a news article. Eleanor's appeal had been denied. The conviction stood, the sentence unchanged. She would remain in prison for the full 12 years, with no possibility of early release. The news brought not triumph, but a quiet sense of justice served. Eleanor's actions had caused irreparable harm, had stolen years of my life, and fundamentally altered our family forever. But in the end, truth had prevailed over deception, reality over the carefully constructed illusion she had maintained for so long. I thought of Shannon, the young woman I'd met earlier that day, now at the beginning of her own journey toward healing and justice. I thought of the hundreds of others who had attended the conference, each carrying their own story of betrayal and survival. I thought of the countless more who remained trapped in situations similar to what ours had been, not yet able to name or escape the abuse they were experiencing. For them, for all of us, I made a silent promise to continue speaking truth, however uncomfortable, to validate experiences others dismissed, to believe those who had been taught not to believe themselves. The cycle of gaslighting and manipulation thrived in silence and isolation. Breaking that cycle required voices willing to say the unsayable, to name the dynamics that preferred to remain unnamed. As I finally drifted towards sleep, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. Eleanor had tried to poison not just my body, but my very sense of self, my connection to reality, my relationship with my family. She had failed. What remained after her toxic influence had been removed was stronger, truer, and more resilient than what had existed before. The birthday cake that had revealed her final attempt at poisoning me had also, ironically, been the catalyst for my liberation. In trying to silence me once and for all, she had instead given me the evidence I needed to reclaim my voice, and with it, my life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to share our story, new survivors seeking validation and support. The work of healing, both personal and collective, was ongoing, never truly complete. But for tonight, it was enough to know that we had transformed poison into medicine, trauma into testimony, isolation into community. From the ashes of what Eleanor had destroyed, we had built something new, something stronger, something true. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.